Welcome to another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Dr. Dave Peltz, and also joining us this week and every week is Dr. Joe Hamlett. How are you doing today, Dr. Joe?
I'm doing good, Dr. Dave. How are you doing?
Well, apparently I've had a few too many cups of coffee as usual.
I can relate.
So,
Absolutely.
high octane go-go juice, that's what I call it. Not necessarily economical, but it gets you where you're going. All
Right.
right. So today's topic is going to be managing your career. And in the
Okay.
usual fashion, one of us brings up a topic, and then conveniently tosses it to the other co-host within bewilderment or not, and we figure this stuff out. So Dr. Joe, what are your thoughts on managing your career?
Well, Dave, that is a very good topic. If you listen, if anyone out there in the audience has listened or seen any of our prior or previous episodes, the one thing we do talk about is you owning your destiny, you owning what success looks like. So why wouldn't you want to manage your own career? And I think back to, for me, and I'm guilty of it, just like many other people are. For a long time, I didn't manage my career. I really was that individual that I'll get what comes. I mean, I didn't really deliberately do anything about furthering my career or managing my career or even thinking about what my career looks like down the
Right.
road. It wasn't until I started on my journey, you know, being intentional, and that was back when I went back to school because maybe I had a midlife crisis or that epiphany that finally the light bulb came on. I'm thinking, where do I go next? Am I going to be happy with my career at the end of all this? And that was the first time I remember thinking, how do I manage my career? What should
Mhm.
I do next? What's in it for, at the time at the average Joe? Where am I going to end up? And after that critical self-reflection, I discovered one way to do that is to manage my career. And so that's when again took that hard look at where I am today, where I would like to be, and then what it was going to take to get there. So that was the start for me. Like I say, back
Mhm.
in 2005, much later in my career.
Mhm.
And I bring that up because I think, even when I talk to people today, especially younger people or people just starting out in the workforce, think about and don't expect people to have the answers, to what they want their life to look like. Say you're a 20-year-old. I don't expect you, by the time you're 60 that you map out this whole life for you. But, if you're going to work for a company or doing a job or organization, what is the intent? What do you hope to gain from that position? Where are you going to go from there? Is this just to fill, the void? You need a job, you need to pay bills, or are you looking to learn long term? I'm doing this job or this position to ultimately get to there. And I think that's when I think about managing your career, it starts with that. Again, we're going to do things we don't want to do or don't like, but maybe it still fits into that grand scheme of things of where you ultimately like to go. So I'll
Mhm.
stop right there. I see you
All
kind of
right.
wanting to jump in there.
Yeah, I just can't help myself from talking. That's why we do this. So, yeah, I really like how you shared your story with us, kind of keeping it brief, but just getting down into the nuts and bolts of things. I really didn't start managing my career until almost, I would say, 3 years, pretty close to 3 years into my military career. So out of high school into the military, and just like you mentioned, just kind of floating along that river, just waiting to see what happens, wondering why things aren't happening. How are other
Right.
people doing these things and getting promoted, and that sort of thing. And one of my supervisors, kind of took me under his wing and said, "Hey, you need to start being a little bit more conscious and deliberate about what you're doing, and think about your career and how you want where you want to be." And
Right.
after several discussions, it was kind of like, well, I don't want to be at the bottom. I would like to move up, have some responsibility, and help others grow. And we talked about what is it going to take to get there. So that was really the first time I started managing my career. After I got out, I had a general idea of what I thought I wanted to do, and you know, like in some of our previous episodes, I was military police, and I wanted to go into law enforcement, and made some decisions there. But again, similar to you, for me, it was about 2000 when I started going to school full time, and that's really when I started being even more deliberate. And that's when I started having
Right.
milestones and setting
Yep.
milestones and goals, and how do I get there, and what do I need to do? What are the steps it's going to take to get there? So, that was the better part of a 11-year difference, 10-year difference between, you know, realizing, hey, I have to manage my career, and actually beginning to consciously manage my career. It took me 10 years to figure that gap out. So there are some definite challenges with that, and to your point, when we talk to younger folks, and it's not everyone knows what they wanted to do when they grow up, and you and I
Right.
mentioned this, we still don't. We're always open to grow and learn. And so how can
Right.
you, I guess, if you, technically speaking, I want to be a lifelong learner and help people, so maybe I do know what I want to do when I grow up, but what does that position look like? That just depends. I mean, what opportunities are out there? Who wants help? Because it goes to the old adage, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. You can tell people everything they need to do, but if they don't get it or want to do it, they won't do it, or they'll only do it for a short time. So it
Right.
gets back to your point on critical self-reflection and really understanding what you want out of life, out of your career, out of your personal and professional relationships, and how does that look, and what do you need to do to get there? So I'm going to pause.
No, I think you bring up a very good point as far as go back to the piece where you talked about being a lifelong learner, and that whole mindset of even today, maybe I'm not exactly where I want to be, but the idea is that I'm still gathering information, I'm still learning, I'm still applying the things that I need to get me to this end state. But this part of the journey is also important, like you said. Um, is this a real uh, thing, being a lifelong learner? Yes, it is. But I mean,
Mm-hmm.
how does that apply to managing your career? So I guess that would be a question that we should ask ourselves, because
Absolutely.
yeah, you think about what's next, but without going through this learning and then being able to apply that to whatever the future is for you, then I think you're gonna miss the boat. So yeah, we say that we're don't know what we want to be when we grow up, but you mentioned it. We do want to help people. We want to help other people reach their potential. We want to continue being educators,
Mm-hmm.
being mentors, coaches. So we do understand that about ourselves. But at the same time, all these things that we're currently going through or doing, we're still trying to figure out how to apply that to
Mm-hmm.
that part of our lives, the pieces that we want to continue to do. So, but I think you mentioned it too, the idea that we understand where we're going. That is a challenge sometimes, because especially being younger and not really experienced life, it is difficult to think, oh, I want to be this, unless you still have that lifelong dream that you had as a kid, or you continue to you know
Well, Joe, and, and
push.
and I'll even toss in there that it applies to people that are not young, that maybe they've been with a company
Right,
for
right.
many years, and now they're transitioning or trying to figure out what's next. I've been doing this for 10, 15, 20, 30, 35 years. What's after this?
Right.
What do I do with my career? Do I take that next step? Do I just keep doing it? Do I maybe I go into a different position where there's more coaching and mentoring? Do I just keep being a technician or a manager or a leader? I mean, there's lots of options out there. So,
No, that's a good point, because even I've said it many times before on
mhm,
previous episodes, just the idea that if you've been doing a job for number of years, 10, 12, 15 years, and you've reached that point to where you're thinking, what's next? Or what do I want to do? Do I want to continue being an operator, technician, or even a
mhm,
leader? Is this the path that I want to remain on? And so again, when I'm talking to people and they're kind of curious about what they want to do next, some of the suggestions are, what do you enjoy doing? Does this align to your dreams, your passions, things like that. But I also want to help them understand too that if they've been doing something for a long period of time and that's all they've been doing,
Yeah.
then they put themselves in a position as well, just in case, something happened.
Hmm.
Again, we don't want to wish anything bad on anyone else, but the reality is that things happen, things
Yeah.
change. Um, me and David talked about this many times. How many times we've been displaced in a job, thinking
Hmm.
things are going well, then all of a sudden they do the all hands meeting or the
Hmm.
departmental meetings, and they're telling you, hey, we got to downsize, or hey, we're going to be changing direction. So just if you think in terms of continuing to manage your career, those should be some considerations
Hmm.
also. Even though things may have been going well for a long time in that career or what you've been doing, uh, tomorrow's not promised. And
Hmm.
so we've seen that in these past few years, how many things have changed. So we just always encourage people to really look at that. And if you, again, think about if you work for a company that has 10,000 employees, they lay off 6,000, then you're going to be amongst those 6,000 people that are
Hmm.
looking for a job. And so if you think about what's going to separate you from your peers, and if you haven't done anything, then you're going to be, in that stock, in that pile of
Hmm.
numbers and names that are very similar. So
Yeah.
if you think about managing your career, you're not necessarily just managing it for what is happening today, but you're also managing for what could potentially happen. And
Right.
I think that's the most important thing, is that you sometimes you can't see it. And we've said this before too. You can't prepare for everything, but you can do some things beyond just staying stagnant and
Hmm.
doing the same things over and over again, whether, like we talked about in the past, whether it's certifications or maybe take a few courses, some things that are going to enhance your
Yeah, and that
learning.
and that reminds me of when I talk to some folks, they say, "Well, I don't have the time for classes or training or this or
Right.
that," and it's like, well, that's fine, but you're really limiting yourself because when you're at
Yep.
work, you are doing just those things. It's just you need to make time for maybe a few
Yep.
extra
Those
things, and maybe make
additional
time for
things.
your
Yep.
family or your personal life, but maybe part of that personal life is going to include getting a certification or learning something new or observing or training or networking
Right.
there's so many different options out there. And um yeah, we have to put things into perspective sometimes because they're not going to just fall into our laps.
Right.
There is some deliberateness to this. You have to manage your
Absolutely.
career. No one's going to do it for you.
Yep. Yep.
And that's one of the hard lessons I learned, early in my career. I was like, well, when is it going to be my turn? When is it going to be my turn? Or it is my turn and I get skipped over. And it's like, because I wasn't managing my career, I was just
Well,
waiting.
and I was gonna kind of touch on that a little bit. You say that nobody else is managing your career, but are they
Are they?
managing
Yeah,
it?
that's
Yeah,
the other side of it.
because
But are they managing it for you?
because you just said it. You waited because someone else told you to wait, or
Hmm.
wait for your turn, and
Fair
then the
point.
rules change,
Yeah.
and then somebody else gets that same position that you were told to wait for. So in essence, someone else is managing your career.
Yeah.
They're
And they're
they're
managing their career in addition to your career.
Exactly. And who are they going to take care of first?
Hmm.
Themselves, and as well as those close people and connections. So although they're saying they're helping you, or they're have an idea for your career, that it still is going to be aligned to what they need out of their
Right.
career. So,
Right.
be cautious, because if you don't manage your career, and really short term, someone else will be managing your
Yeah.
career. They're going to be, just pushing you to the side because you haven't lived up to their standards, or exhibited those things that they view as valuable.
Hmm.
So they're going to put you where they think you fit.
Yeah.
And so again, that's another form of them managing your career and you not managing your career.
Yeah.
So
So then
yeah,
that
I
begs the
just
question, what are we doing to manage our career so that someone doesn't step in and, I'm going to air quote, manage it for us,
right.
So it's like, their definition of managing your career may be a lot different, and it probably is going to be a lot different than
Absolutely.
what you're thinking your career
In
should look
most
like.
cases, it will
They
be.
might want to be holding you down. They might want to put you in a different area, and maybe that's not what you want.
Exactly.
So when we talk about managing your career, I'm going to go back to what you said earlier, that deliberateness, that,
That
you know,
and that
that
was yep.
that reflection, and even incorporating up some of that, some foresight. What is how is your industry or your job or your career or your company trending? What about your geographic area? How is that trending?
Right.
Because if we can go back in time, and when the steel mills were the big thing, you were guaranteed
Yep.
work, and it was hard work, but you'd make a good living and you could work there forever. What happens when those old steel towns dried up and got
Absolutely.
bought
Yep.
out? What
Yep.
did those folks do to manage their careers? And a lot of people hadn't thought that far ahead,
No,
and
we typically don't.
yeah.
And I was gonna say, you're living the life, everything's great, the money's rolling in, you're taking care of your family, and those are those needs that you have to, take care of
Hmm.
immediately. But so many people don't think about beyond that. They're thinking everything's going great, and they're not really prepared for that shoe to drop, or
Hmm.
for that change in direction, or like you said, the job dries up, the industry dries up, and then you're left with nothing. And so that makes it even worse because again, you've been a welder at the steel mill for 20 years, and then that industry dries up. Where are you going to get a job as a welder?
Hmm.
Because that's all you've known. So those are the things that a lot of people got caught up in those type of shifts in the economy, the regions, all those things. And so that's why, if we can do anything for you, or if we can make any suggestions, it is about managing your career and trying to think beyond what's
Hmm.
directly in front of you. And that's the challenge. Again, I referred back to younger people, because I guess that one for me seems more natural because they are, don't have any experience yet. So they don't know what they like or what they
Hmm.
don't like. So that's
Or
why I say
maybe they
that's a
have
little more
limited
challenging.
experience, or maybe it's a
Yeah.
person that's been doing
Right.
something for 40 years and that's all they know.
Right.
And that's one of the
Right.
questions that comes up for me quite frequently is well, there's actually two things. One's a statement, I don't know how to manage my career, and two, I don't know who do I go to
Right.
help me manage my career. Who's that coach, that mentor, that advisor, if you will? And when we look at like the military as an example, when the folks get out of the military, there's a gap there. So what do they do if they don't know what to do, what they want to be when they grow up, or what's next, because they haven't managed their career, because the military does pretty much manage your career for you in some
Right.
regards.
Yep.
But what's next? And you could say the same thing about people in corporate and other industries, home, their own businesses. It's like, what's next? What's the end goal? Where are you trying to go? What milestones are you trying to reach? What do you need to fill those gaps? How do you reverse engineer that? And sometimes you do need some network contacts to reach out to say, hey Joe, hey Dave, I need a little help. What's going on? How do I do this? Where do I go? Who do I talk to?
And that was actually where I was going to go to, is just the networking piece, the
Mm-hmm.
growing your network beyond just your direct peers, the people you work with, but
Mm-hmm.
reaching beyond that. And I think I started to say that a little bit earlier, but maybe got sidetracked. But part of that is, if you want to work in a new environment or a new industry, how are you going to gain knowledge or experience about that if you've never worked there? And
Mm-hmm.
one way to do that is to network, whether it's LinkedIn or whatever other platforms you use, whether it's your church or whatever it is. If you know someone that works in that industry, then you might want to reach out to them and connect with them, so
Mm-hmm.
that they can give you some of those things that you need. That's a huge part of it, the networking piece, when we're thinking about managing our career. Even if you're at a large organization and you're currently in one role, one department in that organization, and you'd like to move into another role in that same organization, but a different department,
Mm-hmm.
how are you going to accomplish that? So, again, that goes back to the networking piece,
Mm-hmm.
reaching out. Well, I see the title that I'd like to be in one day. Maybe I reach out to that person, see if we can have lunch, or see if they'd be welcome,
Mm-hmm.
open to, maybe talking a little bit about their career. That's
Right.
part of it. So again, if we think about managing our career, it could be as simple as that. If I want to
Yeah.
change careers, if I want to
And
change
making the
job
time to
titles,
think about these things and to
right?
reach out. I mean, you have to take some initiative in this because no one's going to do it for, well, they will do it for you, but not necessarily the way you
Right.
want. But
Exactly.
they're
Yeah.
not necessarily going to be doing all the networking. They're there to help you, not do it for you.
Right.
So
Yeah.
we need to look at that as well. You have to make time, whether it's 5 minutes a day or, you know, 2 hours a day, whatever it is, you have to set some framework for yourself to follow.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to go back to one of the best pieces of advice one of my professors told me many years ago, and that was, Dave, just because you're not writing doesn't mean you're not researching, and research is working towards that goal of writing.
Right.
So,
Right.
you know, you have to put some time in before you'll start seeing the fruit of your work.
Right.
And that's really an important lesson to think about. It's like, well, it's not just going to pop up, you know, out of nowhere, out of thin air, and like there's your dream job, just because you
Yep.
wished for it. You know, you've got to have some sort of plan and deliberateness towards achieving this plan. And sometimes it's reaching out to people, and sometimes it may be doing something that you don't necessarily enjoy doing. Maybe you're a mechanic, maybe you're an attorney, maybe you're in healthcare or whatever, and you're just like, yeah, I'm over this. This is not what I
Right.
want to do anymore. It
Yep.
doesn't mean you failed. It just means you're ready for the next chapter in your life. And the question is then, what are you doing to get to that next chapter?
Right. And I had a conversation with a young lady just the other day, and her first question was, how did you achieve all the things you have to this point? And back to kind of what you said about, the commitment and the sacrifices. Like you said, you might be doing these
Or
things that
investments, depending on your perspective.
investment. Yeah, I mean, it is. You have to give some time, and
Hmm.
so sometimes it may be a sacrifice of time for something else that you were doing.
Yeah.
So and that's really what it comes down to. What commitment are you making? How deliberate are you going to be? Because you can keep stringing things along and keep saying you're going to do it. You have an intention to do it, but you haven't done anything. You haven't committed to that process.
Hmm.
So that's what I just let her know, because she's kind of in a phase right now where she's thinking, should I keep doing these certain things? And I referred her back to, so where are you trying to go? What are you
Yeah.
trying to accomplish?
Sometimes you
And
have to
then
do something that you
exactly,
don't like for a while until you can get
and
into a
that'll help
position
you
to do something that you
define,
do like. Yeah.
whether it makes sense to continue doing these certain things. Because
Hmm.
if it doesn't fit in your grand scheme of things or your endpoint, then maybe it doesn't make sense to do it.
Yeah.
But if it aligns in any way that it makes sense, then you're probably going to have to commit to it. And I think
Yeah.
that's the part most people don't see. Again, they see your titles, they see your accomplishments, but they haven't seen, the under the water. So we always see that
Right.
picture of, the one picture that shows success at the top above the water line, but then
Hmm.
beneath that, it shows all these other things that you had to do to accomplish that.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the same thing with managing your career.
Yeah.
It may not
People see
appear
the end result, and they
exactly.
don't take
They
time, or
don't
they don't
see
understand or see
right
all the work that went into it
that
to lead
went
up to
into
this.
it. Absolutely. And that was kind of what I was passing on to her, that yeah, even me, all the things I've achieved, most people just see that, now I'm a doctor, I'm an author and all those things, but they didn't see the journey that I took. Like you
Hmm.
said, even if I wasn't writing, I was researching. If I wasn't, doing this, I was doing something else that was
Hmm.
contributing to that success, whatever
Yeah.
that was. So, and that's what she's doing right now. Because the first part of the conversation we were talking, and as we continue to talk, I was like, "Wow, you're doing a lot of different things," and so that's when her question came up. Hey, does this make sense? And so again, I told her, hey, it depends on where you're
Depends.
trying
Yeah.
to go,
Yeah.
because most people don't see that underside or all the
Right.
deliberate work that goes into what you're
Yeah.
trying to achieve. So,
Yeah. I'm gonna keep. I'm gonna just start throwing some more stuff out there.
okay.
Awkward pause. You know, so similar to you, I was talking to some folks last week during a military briefing, and the question came up: how do we know if we're doing what we want to do? Well, you have to know yourself. You have to think about what you want.
Right.
You know, I can't tell you. You know, I have several people we come up to me and say, well, I don't know what I want to do after I get out of the military or after I change jobs. I just know I don't want to do this.
Right.
That's the start. You know what you don't
Absolutely.
want to
Yep.
do.
Yep.
But there again, I tell them, in order to get to that next step, you may have to continue doing what you're doing now because you obviously do it well. You just may not enjoy it, but that may be
Right.
that mainstay to help get you in a position. And I stress that over and over to get to that next step so you can start marching down the correct path.
Right.
And maybe that's setting a few minutes aside, maybe that's doing some research, maybe it's talking to people, maybe it's talking to your peers and colleagues, supervisors, mentors, coaches, professors, teachers, trainers, whatever, family members, the clergy. So you just have to, as you mentioned, Joe, you have to commit to doing something and then follow through with it. That
Right.
deliberateness and that commitment are key, because we can wish all day long, but that's not going to help us. I mean, we have to do something more than just think about it. We have to start taking more action, and thinking about
Absolutely.
it is a piece of it, but there comes a point when you've thought about it enough and you just need to start taking
And you have to
action.
move on it.
You have to
Absolutely.
move on it. And
Yep.
and Joe and I like to use the example. We talked about doing this podcast for months and months
Months.
and
Yep.
months, and we're like, well, and we overanalyze shit sometimes, and that's a great plug for one of our earlier videos. It's like, sometimes we just get so wrapped up in things we don't pause, and we chase all these rabbits down these rabbit holes, or we chase the pretty shiny things with the distractions instead of kind of reeling ourselves back in and say, okay, I've thought about all these things, I've researched all these things. What is the meat to this? What is the core information that I need to focus on? And then once I identify that, what are then become the next steps? So it could be applying for another job, it could be reaching out to someone, it could be learning your industry or learning a new industry, looking at the geographic region. I'm going to go back to that because things change over time,
Right.
and
Right.
you have to be aware that you may have to do some things that you don't like to do, like you might have to move. You might have to reevaluate your personal life or your professional life, and see if things still fit into the paradigm and the goals that you want to reach.
Right. Well, Dave, and I'll just throw one more thing out there. As far as you talked about, we did procrastinate for a long time on getting this podcast started,
Mm-hmm.
and what I've learned, especially in recent years, is that you got to learn to fail as fast as you can, just
Yeah,
so you can get that out of the way,
stand
and
back
then
up
move
and
to
keep
the
running
next
again.
thing.
Yep.
And so that's again another thing that I'd encourage people, if they're considering, what's next, managing their career, and kind of what you said, if you kind of have an idea of things you don't want to do, then that helps. But then after that, if you're unsure about things, take a test sample and try it, and
Yeah.
see if that's even something that you're thinking about, but it may not align. You may try it out and be like, oh, you know what, this is not exactly what I thought.
Yeah.
But that's the only way you're going to get to a point where you start aligning things that make sense. Is you have
Mm-hmm.
to try some of those things that maybe you don't like or
Yeah.
didn't pan out the way you thought. And I've
Or
heard
that
that
you're not
so
sure
many
about,
times.
and take a little bit
Yeah,
of a risk.
you have to be able to, yeah, put yourself out there a little bit to get a better understanding or gain a better
Mm-hmm.
understanding. And I'll just say this real quick. Again, when I first started my doctoral program, I was gonna, my coursework was IT management because I thought that was the direction I was going to go. And then a couple of classes in, I was like, you know what, this is not it, and I switched back to organizational leadership
Mm-hmm.
because I knew where my passions lie. So that's the other piece of it. If you start to go down a path and it doesn't feel good, it's never too late to say, okay, you know what, I've tried this. This doesn't align with where I want to go. So
Mm-hmm.
again, I would just encourage people to
Yeah.
really consider that when they're thinking about
Absolutely.
what's next,
Well,
or managing their
Joe,
career.
you always have great advice for our viewers and listeners. So we've got about a minute left. Is there anything you'd like to add real quick before we head on out?
Yeah, yeah. The biggest thing about managing your career is, really being deliberate about where you're trying to go. And it's okay if you don't have a clue of, where you want to end up, but have an idea of. I think what Dave said earlier about understanding what you don't want to do, that will start to narrow the focus of what you want to achieve, because then you'll understand, I don't want to do this, I don't want to be in this industry. You'll understand those things, and I think it will help you better align to the things that you want to do and want to accomplish. And on the other side of that, too, remember if you don't manage your career, in some form or fashion, someone else will, and more than likely, you will not like the path they choose for you. So if
Right.
you want to have control over the outcome, then I highly encourage, highly suggest that you really think about managing your own career. And so I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Very well said, Dr. Joe. I'm going to throw one more thing out there, and that is don't be afraid to make a mistake or
Yeah.
what some people perceive as failure, because that's all part of the learning process. If you're not making mistakes, you're not learning. So with that, we'd like to thank our viewers and listeners for tuning in and watching or listening to another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. If you like or enjoy any of the episodes, including this one or any of our other ones, please give us a share and get the word out there that, hey, there's a couple of crazy, silly guys that like to share their knowledge and just do things to try to make people, make their lives a little bit better in some way, shape, or form. With that, we'd like to thank you again for attending and watching our podcast. And until next time, keep on being your not so ordinary you.